Andy, thanks very much for joining us. Looking at the French market, but also, I guess, your views across Europe, in terms of the capital flows, the appetite of capital, what are you seeing at the moment?
Quite clearly, COVID has changed the way people are investing. The separate account model coming from far away is really struggling to do the basics of visiting buildings, having investment committees, opining on buildings, and the fund model is probably taking some of that space. But fundamentally, domestic capital is ruling at the moment, and that in pretty much every main country around Europe. So my own company, Europa Capital, is owned by Mitsubishi Estates by to 75%, and Mitsubishi, we run separate accounts with them. And unfortunately, they're pretty much on hold unless there are Mitsubishi people on the ground. And we have, however, on the other side of the coin, we have a Japanese fund investor who's about to come into my core fund, and that allows them access to markets. So, that's a new trend.
And just in terms of the market outlook, both I guess for Paris and also France, how do you see that at the moment?
So there's, in this country as elsewhere, there's a very sharp polarization between the beds and the sheds, which is what pretty much everybody wants, and the retail and the hospitality, which is pretty much what everyone doesn't want. And that has funneled all the capital from retail hospitality towards beds and sheds. And it's a very asymmetrical look. Somewhere in the middle of all of that is the office sector, and the jury's still out here as elsewhere as to where that's going in the long run. In the short run, we're seeing that La Défense particularly is the epicenter of problem for occupiers. That to do with the tall towers, the density, the relative lack of amenity. And for the minute, that's a place where it's hard to let.
And do you see, you mentioned there, of course, the retail and hotel and leisure sector. Do you see that as a short-term hit, potentially with then, a bounce back? I mean, given that France, Paris is very high on the list in terms of tourism.
Yeah, no, I see it as a bounce back, but not in the immediate future. And let's just remember that the retail problems have been around for years before COVID. What COVID does is, of course, to accelerate trends that were out there. So since about 2016, 17, there's been what the French love to call retail bashing, and the retailers themselves have been thoroughly bashed. So 2018, we had Gilets jaunes and riots. 2019, we had general strikes, and now we've got a dose of COVID. So retailers, particularly fashion retailers, are having a hard time. But it will come back, and people will shop, and it won't be done all with Amazon. So I think that in a couple of years, the risk-adjusted returns for retail and also the hotel sector look pretty good.
Great. Thanks very much for joining us from your office in Paris, Andy. Always good to see you.
Thanks, Richard.